When I'm on Reddit and on the forums, I see a lot of people speculating as to what the best builds for Taka might be. Now, there's a lot of different ways to play Taka, but particularly for the way that I play Taka, I play as a glass cannon. I seek to deal as much burst damage in as short a time as possible. And if you're someone who likes to play Taka like that as well, I've built a calculator to help predict what combination of items might yield the best results. So let me give you a quick introduction to how this works. On the left side over here, you will see all of the variables, the numbers, what level are you, what items do you have, how about your target, what level are they, what do they have for defensive items. On the right side, you have all of the calculations. Now throughout this, anywhere you see a white field, that is a place where you can and probably should enter in some number. Anything that's a yellow field is a calculated field. So in other words, don't touch that. There is actually a number or output that will come from what you enter into the white fields. Let's jump right into how this can be used with a real-world example. I see a lot of people who are looking at building Taka, and a lot of people say build Taka Crystal because of burst, and that makes sense. But I feel like a lot of people struggle in the early game because in the early game, they don't benefit as much from Crystal as they think they should. So let's model this out. So let's say, for example, you're a level 4 Taka. So I am going to put a 4 in here for level. Now you're going to notice that on the right side here, a whole bunch of numbers have changed as a result of that. First of all, you will have rank 3 in your A ability. That does 225 damage. Likewise, your base damage or your base weapon attack damage will also increase as you gain in levels. And so all of these numbers here will automatically adjust based on those variables. Additionally, your target will assume he's level 4 as well. What I have done is I've created an average of what their base hit points are, as well as what their base armor and shield values will be. Now this doesn't include any items, but once again, this is an average. So if you're playing against a glaive, he's going to have higher base health overall, but across the board, across most heroes, this is what you're going to see for a kind of an average for defenses and for health. Now, jumping a little bit further, let's go ahead and throw in some items. Now, say you went ahead and tried to build a Heavy Prism early game. That's going to give you 60 crystal power. Now, what's important to note about the Heavy Prism, though, is it only affects the damage from your abilities. At this point, you only have one damaging ability, and that is your A ability, your Kaiten. You don't have Exretsu yet, and I've factored that in based on what level you are. So you're not level 6, so you're not going to get any damage out of your C ability. Now, with Kaiten, however, your A ability, there's only a crystal power ratio of 0.2, so only 20% or 1/5 of your crystal power actually benefits this ability. So your overall ability damage will increase by 12. With shield factored in and whatnot from your target, who will have probably an average around 38 base shield value, your damage from your ability will be about 171. Now, if you factor in the fact that you have a base attack value, and you get one auto attack on him in addition to your base ability here and your crystal power, you'll get around 258 damage from a single attack, assuming that's a crit, as well as your ability. So you've done about 28% of his total health. So let's go ahead and jot this down. So we did with one auto attack that was a crit, as well as using my A ability once, it generated 258 damage. Likewise, my basic attacks, because I'll have to be really reliant upon basic attacks before level 6, are going to be around 86 damage apiece. And of course I'm getting that from right here, which is what my opening attack damage is, and then also of course factoring in my target's armor, which is 38. Now, let's go ahead and remove that crystal power, which only boosted my ability damage, which I can only use once per 8 seconds, down to 0. And I'm going to increase my weapon damage by 45. What I've basically done is say, let's, instead of using the 950 gold on a Heavy Prism, let's use that 950 gold to buy a 6 Sins and a Weapon Blade. So that gives me 45 weapon power. Now let's look at the results. First of all, you're going to notice immediately that my damage now has increased to 298 damage from a single auto attack and using my ability. Now why is that? Well, the 60 crystal damage only increases my damage output by 12. Weapon attacks, however, once again, your auto attacks, we're going to assume here, are typically going to be crits because you've got your passive, which allows you to get plus 50% damage. Now, in addition to making one auto attack much more powerful, imagine that also your future auto attacks are going to be much stronger as well. So 134 damage per auto attack, assuming you're critting because your key stacks are maxed out. So you can see really quickly here that before level 6, weapon damage is definitely the way to go, and that you're probably going to struggle early game more so than you typically do as a Taka if you try to do crystal. So my recommendation out of this, really start building towards your tension bow, and then start, which you can finish by around level 7, and then you can start building towards crystal. And you'll still get lots of burst, and you'll not miss out on the effects of having a crystal Taka. So some people might say, Gad, I want my crystal power so that when I do hit level 6, then I can get that super burst from my Exretsu, because as you can see here, Exretsu gets a 1.7 ratio for crystal power. So for every 100 crystal power, I get another 170 damage out of Exretsu. So let's go ahead and do some math. First of all, I'm going to use level 7 to be fair, because at level 7 is when you can oftentimes finish a big item like a tension bow or a frostburn or a shatter glass. So I'm going to use level 7 as an example, and I'm going to make my target level 7 as well. And let's use, say, Frostburn or an Eve of Harvest as an example. If you finish that, you're not going to really have much additional crystal power. You're still going to have around 60 crystal power from that. And nothing else for stats that we need to worry about here. So if we go down the list here, you'll see that you're getting about an extra 102 damage out of your Exretsu. So rather than doing just a plain 330 damage, you're doing about 432. Of course, as we already indicated earlier, your Kaiten is only getting around a 12 extra damage out of it. So really not that much. In the end, about 114 points of damage before shield becomes a factor. In the end, your total ability damage for burst, including a single auto attack, which is a crit, and any procs, which we don't have any Aftershock or Tension Bow yet, and then also your abilities. That's going to add up to being around 569 damage, and or about 51% of the average health of a target, assuming they don't have any items to boost their health, which by level 7 they might. That being said, let's go ahead and take a look at what this would look like with a Shatter Glass. So let's assume you didn't want any mana regen, you went raw damage, you want as much burst as possible, you went with a Shatter Glass. Let's put that at a whopping 115 crystal power. This now puts me at about a 23 bonus for my Kaiten and about a 195 damage bonus for my Exretsu. So that's pretty darn awesome. In the end, this puts me at around a 636 total damage output, as you can see here. Now, one thing I might refer back to, and I think this is really important to mention right here, and it's not demonstrated in this spreadsheet, is that assuming you have full key stacks, 5 key stacks, that gives you 125% cooldown acceleration. That means that your Kaiten here will have around a cooldown of about 6.5 seconds, so every 6.5 seconds you'll be able to use that. And your Exretsu has a cooldown just a hair underneath 9 seconds. So every 9 seconds you'll get that extra 195 damage burst. So keep that in mind. Now let's model out what a Tension Bow is going to do. So we're going to get rid of our crystal power. We're going to give us an additional 45 weapon power. We're going to give us 15% armor penetration from the tension bow. And we're also going to say, yes, give me a tension bow proc, which is going to add in a bonus 180 damage in this field down here. Now notice, the damage of burst that you're able to get from a tension bow ends up being around 676 damage total, which is actually about 40 more damage than you have with the crystal, with the shatter glass. Why is that? Now, part of the reason behind this is not only is tension bow giving you a 180 damage bonus, in addition to giving you additional 45 weapon power, which makes your crit strikes much bigger, but the other part of this is there's a 15% armor penetration built into this. So your target right now will have around a 56 armor, and that's mitigating a fair amount of the damage. And so with, as you can see, your total damage here would be about 390, but with armor, that's dropping it down to around 251 damage. And so we're able to get back a little bit of that from the piercing. So in any case, not only is tension bow a superior choice when it comes to burst, it's also superior because it's able to take effect every 6 seconds, whereas your abilities, the lowest cooldown is 6.5, and the highest is 9, which is where you're really getting the most benefit for your crystal. Now, after I build the tension bow, my next objective, to continue with the idea of burst damage and dealing as much damage as I can in as few hits as possible, I want to go crystal. However, my second item isn't really a heavy crystal item per se, it's Aftershock. Now, I have sometimes people contest me on this and say, well, Aftershock really is only useful if people are going to be building health items like say a dragon heart or a shiver steel or a crucible. So let me go ahead and model this out for you. First of all, my Aftershock, it's an expensive item, so usually depending on how well I'm doing, I could finish that as early as say level 10, but oftentimes around maybe 11, sometimes 12, but let's go on the early side of things. Let's say I'm able to finish this by level 10, when people still have relatively lower life values. Additionally, from an Aftershock, I get 35 crystal power. Let's add that in. We're also going to indicate to the spreadsheet that I am getting an Aftershock proc out of this. So that means I will take a chunk of their life when I hit. So you'll notice that I have an Aftershock value here now. And also I want to increase the level of my opponent and also increase their health value by saying they are also level 10. So now I'm getting up to a total damage of 998. So let's go ahead and write this down. 998 damage, and my Aftershock is doing about 266 damage before any shield, because shield will also mitigate the damage of Aftershock because it counts as crystal damage. So let's see what else we can do for an alternative. Once again, I'm going to compare this to getting a shatter glass, because shatter glass is raw damage for crystal Taka. So if I was to go ahead and remove my Aftershock and add in 115 crystal power on top of my tension bow, where would that get me at? So that gets me to 932 damage, which is about 60 damage less than what I'd be getting out of a Aftershock. Now that was against a very low hit point value target. That's assuming that that person had no additional bonus health. So let's start with, say, a basic thing, like a reflex block, or a life spring, or a fountain of youth, or a fountain of renewal. So if I go here and I remove my crystal damage back down to 35, and add an Aftershock again, so we're at the base 998 damage, if I was to go ahead and boost that to a bonus of 200 health, I'm now doing 1,021 damage. If this person had a dragon heart, this gets even larger. And of course, if you get higher to like a crucible or a shiver steel, it gets to the point where I'm doing a full extra 80 points of damage to these targets. So for an Aftershock to be successful, it does not necessarily require people to have bonus items to, such as Dragon Heart and whatnot, in order for it to be effective. It still has probably the greatest burst value, even above and beyond a Shatterglass. For Taka, that is. Okay, so let's say you're on board with me up to this point, that we are agreed on the fact that Tension Bow and Aftershock are probably the two best burst items for a Taka player. Now, what do we build after that? There's a lot of different options still. We've got more item slots we can fill. My next best one that I can probably recommend, believe it or not, despite the skepticism, is probably a Broken Myth. And here's why. So, first of all, let's bump our characters up to level 12. We'll assume that we're now in the very late game, or at least in the early late game. We're all level 12. And one of the things you're going to notice here is that the average base armor and shield values for a typical target without any items is going to be close to 100. What that means is at 100 value, that means that you are now doing 50% of the damage that you would otherwise want to be doing. So as an example of this, I'm seeing here with my Aftershock and Tension Bow combination that my abilities, including Aftershock, is going to do about 1,500 damage, but after shield, I'm only doing about 800 of that. So it's being greatly mitigated. Now, if I was to go ahead and throw any additional shield on top of that, even a Fountain of Renewal or a Kinetic Shield, which gives 60 shield, we're not talking Aegis here. We're talking just a lower shield value that's a plus 60 rather than a plus 110. You're going to get even more significantly mitigated. Actually, let me go ahead and show you an example. I go ahead and throw a 60 in here, and now we're doing 600 damage out of 1,500. So let's just use a worst case, kind of a worst case scenario for Taka, and we're going to assume that, or a worst case scenario for the case for a Broken Myth, that is. And let's first start off by modeling out what a Shatterglass would look like. And once again, I'm using Shatterglass because that is raw damage burst. It is the best alternative besides the ones that I'm giving you. So I'm going to go in here and just boost up my crystal power to 150, adding another 115 from a Shatterglass. And that will put my damage up here to a total of 1,188. Now, let's go back to my alternative of doing a Broken Myth. If I go ahead and drop this down to a 35 plus the 20 from the Broken Myth, that gives me 55 crystal power. And then I'm also going to switch this over to tell the software that I am going to do 15% penetration. This will put my damage output with a Broken Myth up to 1198. So already we are higher than a Shatterglass by just the smallest amount. And keep in mind, I am modeling this at 100% health. So this would effectively be just like a Piercing Shard. You haven't even upgraded it to a Broken Myth yet, it's just a Piercing Shard. Now, as I've lost health, you don't need to be at low health for this to be effective. Let's say something reasonable. Let's say you're at 70% health, right? That's not uncommon. That's not like you're dangerously low for any means. That just means you've taken a couple of hits. That now puts me at 1,300 damage output, which is still pretty huge. Now, this is with just baseline defenses. I'm not going to go ahead and model all the rest of this. This video is certainly getting long enough as it is. But suffice it to say, if this person had any degree of additional shielding from items, which once again can be very minimal, the Broken Myth will continue to pay out larger and larger dividends above and beyond the Shatterglass. Because the Shatterglass, all you're doing is you're adding an additional crystal damage to crystal damage that is already being severely mitigated. Whereas with the Broken Myth, what's happening is you're not only taking all your previous crystal damage and making it more effective, but that also includes your Aftershock. Your Aftershock, since that's crystal damage, is also benefiting from the Pierce. that you get from the Broken Myth. So anyway, I think I've beat a dead horse enough. I really highly recommend Tension Bow, Aftershock, and Broken Myth as your core damage burst items for a Taka, and I hope this helps to prove why I believe that. And I thank you for your time, and I wish you the best in playing Taka.